Today, I'm pleased to say there is some good news. It's a win for common sense, a win for Millham, and a bit of a win for TalkTV. The Home Office has paused its plans after local protests. Almost 2,000 people joined in action group and public meetings were packed to the rafters as locals banded together to demand that the plans were scrapped. Local services are already stretched to breaking point, and without significant investment, it would not have been possible for the area to support these new residents. So what happens to the houses now? Perhaps they could be developed into council properties. Just a thought, but I won't hold my breath. Meanwhile, we learnt today that more than 2,000 Channel migrants have arrived illegally so far this year in 2024. Home Office figures show 290 people arrived on Sunday alone. Despite winter weather, the boats keep coming. We can only imagine how many more will make that crossing over the spring and summer. Rishi Sunak's promise to stop the boats is literally in tatters. The Prime Minister is clearly living on a different planet. He said yesterday, "I'm confident that we really will be able to stop the boats, and that will mean we won't have this pressure on all our local areas to find places to house illegal migrants." Well, maybe the Rwanda plan could work if those flights ever get off the ground. But what are we supposed to do whilst we wait for the Lords and the lawyers to decide if it's even allowed? Patience is wearing very thin, especially as Sunak seems determined to purge his party of those political figures who actually have the backbone to say what's really happening. And to add to Sunak's misery today, David Neal, the former Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, fired by the Home Office, is giving evidence to a select committee. Now, Neal has already said that Border Force didn't check passengers on hundreds of private jets arriving into London. This allowed criminals, illegal immigrants, trafficking victims and extremists to enter the UK without undergoing any kind of scrutiny by the authorities. So remember that next time you're in a 2-hour immigration queue on your way home from Alicante with the kids in tow. If only you'd gone private, you'd be home by now on the sofa with a giant Toblerone, 200 cigs and whatever else you fancied smuggling back. It is a joke. Joining me live, Henry Bolton, OBE, International Border Control expert, to discuss this and more. Afternoon to you, Henry. I mean, I say what a joke.
Afternoon, Ian.
I mean, it does feel as if someone's having a bit of a joke here. We keep hearing Rishi Sunak. Every time the figures get worse and worse, more people coming across. 2,000 this year. What was going on in Millham is really just one microcosm of what's happening in many, many parts of the UK. Take people out of hotels. It's costing 7 million quid a day. Well, we'll just put them in houses. It costs 6.9 million quid a day. I mean, none of this is being solved. It's a mess.
It is a mess, Ian, and you know, people are losing patience. Then you get somebody like Lee Anderson who starts to sort of raise concerns, and they're immediately labelled. Look, you know, the people of this country, most people, I believe it's most people anyway, are tired of a prime minister and a party, in fact, political leaders who keep saying that they're going to do something and then utterly fail to do it. And in the chaos that ensues, in this particular case, with immigration, we have it's not just this case in Cumbria, but it's all across the country. We see hotels taken up, we see local housing taken up, we see barges being used. It is an incoherent, inconsistent and badly thought through and implemented plan. It's not. I hesitate because it's not a plan. Yeah. You know, you just mentioned the Independent Inspector of Borders, who's just been sacked for, as you quite rightly say, highlighting that hundreds, if not thousands, of flights into the UK have not been checked. I was saying this 3 years ago. I was trying to raise the alarm on this. It's also private boats. We're very good at interdicting and then escorting back to the UK the dinghies. But there are a myriad of smaller vessels, privately owned vessels, that are coming into the UK in small ports every day. There was a time when the harbour masters and port masters were responsible for checking those, part of the border sort of infrastructure and systems that we had. But that's long since gone, since political parties and governments felt that you know the ports should be purely commercial. Well, you know. What's really frustrating, Ian, for me, and I think most of the country, is the sheer inability to do anything properly. Now, is that our parliamentarians? Is it the civil service? Well, I don't know. And until somebody actually develops a plan, then we're not going to know. That's the missing piece here, Ian. There is no plan. There is just a prime minister saying, well, you know, here's my 9-point plan, my 5 promises. That's it. Yeah. There is no planning.
I would have thought by now Rishi Sunak might be a bit embarrassed, Henry, to even utter the phrase, we are going to stop the boats. I'm convinced we can stop the boats. I know we can stop the boats. Quite aside from the demonstrable evidence that he is not stopping the boats and they continue in very large numbers, 2,000 this year alone, and we're only about 7 weeks in to 2024. It's not looking good, and that's before the good weather properly kicks in as well. An extraordinary situation where most polling suggests that Labour are more trusted on immigration. I don't know what people are thinking of when they answer affirmative to that question. Just remind us, Henry, we've been over this story many times over the years. How do we stop the boats?
Well, I'm going to say two things here, Ian. One is that if you don't have a strategic framework, then a policy framework clearly defined, then you are not going to be able to pull together your diplomatic effort with your intelligence effort, with your policing efforts, with your legal efforts, with your operational effort on the borders itself. None of these things are going to have any coherence. We need to, that's the first thing, bring that framework. I say first, but concurrently to that, there are a range of different things we could do. So, for example, if we want to actually physically stop the boats on the maritime border, and I think that we can actually drastically reduce the numbers before they even get to the North French coast, but that's part of this overall framework. If we want the operational answer, and I know many people want to know this, look, the military, specialist forces, not necessarily just special forces, but quite often drive ribs, rigid holds, but inflatable sort of around it. It's a bit like a dinghy. Drive them into the belly of a landing craft. Well, there are ways of incapacitating the outboard motors on the dinghies that are crossing the channel at the moment. Quite easily, very safely. If you disable that outboard motor, then it's not got manoeuvre. Therefore, it can't evade, and therefore you're not in a struggle with it. You lower the ramp of a landing craft, can only be done in reasonably good weather, which is when they cross, and drive the landing craft in to scoop them up into the belly of the landing craft. Now, if you then drive that landing craft to the French coast, you could do it with or without agreement, to be quite honest. I'd be tempted, if the French don't want to agree, then to call their bluff and say, look, these people came from your country. You're part of France's international obligations on borders. There's something called the OSCE Border Security and Management concept, is to prevent people leaving their country if they don't have the correct documentation to enter the country they're going to. In this case, that's all of these people in dinghies. So drive them back to the French coast. That's robust. It's going to cause an argument. It's going to cause tension. But we've got to do it, because otherwise this country is going down the pan. And in that sense, Lee Anderson's right. And we've got to call it out for what it is. We've got a government, a political class that is simply failing because they don't have the courage, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the experience, and they probably shouldn't be in the job in the first place.
There it is. Henry, thorough stuff as ever. Thank you, Henry Bolton, with us here on TalkTV. We'll come back to some of your comments in a few minutes.